Oh, hey, it's wow. I mean, it's been a long time. And good to see you. I'm sorry I've been really busy, but thanks for stopping by again. Please come in, please. I've been watching a lot lately. I have been. There's a lot I really like to talk about. You know what I just watched actually, just recently, was Saint Cecelia and Pastor Lawrence. I know lots of people have wanted me to talk about it and wanted me to watch it, and I've been putting it off a little bit. I was somewhat hesitant to watch it, after having watched some shows that were slightly disappointing, but I finally got around to it. I did watch it. I tried to watch it rather quickly so I could have it all in my mind if I wanted to do a video on it. Of course, I'm always on the hunt for some sort of Christian anime. I know that there's not really going to be one because there's not a lot of Christians in Japan, let alone ones who are making anime. And that's not to say that all anime would be inferior to it necessarily, but of course that's just something that I would really love to watch and to be made for a variety of reasons. Obviously, that's something that I would care about. So then I find myself drawn towards different anime that I feel like might be able to hit that mark, even things that might be close. Of course, I talked before about the anime that was made about the Old Testament and how I overall thought it was fine, but it's definitely lacking in a lot of areas and just ended up not really being something I would find myself recommending to people, both Christians or average anime enjoyers alike. This anime I was really hyped about when I heard it was going to come out. Again, I believe it's fairly recent, as in like late last year, early this year, having aired. The manga, of course, a little bit older than it. And I was really excited. It sounded like it was going to be something that really had the potential to be something I could really enjoy and really recommend to people. Sadly, though, I don't think it really follows through with the kind of anime you'd think it might be. Overall, I'd say it ends up being more generic. It ends up being the kind of typical rom-com anime, just with a new skin on it, and a new flavor, a new Halloween costume, basically. The fact that the characters are famous Christians and that the show takes place mostly in a church, none of that really seems to matter at all. It's just a dressing on the show. It's just the costume that the characters are dressed up in for this rom-com play that they're involved in. And it's kind of disappointing. I really expected it to at least be somewhat, to at least care in some way about the characters and the setting that is being depicted, but it ends up feeling very pointless. The very setting of the show ends up feeling very unimpactful and unimportant, which is really unfortunate because there's, like I said, so much potential there for there to be really interesting plot points and character development. There's hardly anything in the show in terms of the plot, in terms of dialogue, that would make you even think anything's based on Christianity to begin with. God is mentioned, I think, in like one episode as even existing, and I mean, they mentioned seminary a few times. Like, there's offhanded mentions to things that Christians do or believe in, but nothing's ever really depicted in terms of Christian beliefs. Nothing's ever really shown in terms of Christian practices. Hello, editor Nick here as well. I forgot to mention that there's a really awkward moment in the anime where Saint Cecelia is praying, quote unquote. She's in the prayer position, right? But she's just talking out loud to fairies that are physically right in front of her. And it's weird because that's not anything like what prayer actually is in real life. It's nothing even close to what Christians even say it is. They just use that word and have her get into the position and just do something else. And I think that kind of sums up exactly how this anime deals with Christianity and Christian practices as a whole. It just, to me, honestly,
It feels like Japanese people dressed up as like a pastor or a nun and then like doing a play, but they're still just obviously Japanese people. Like, I'm not to say that there's anything wrong with Japanese people doing a play or anything, but I could, and obviously it is a Japanese show made by Japanese people who don't seem to have first-person experience with anything that they're trying to depict. But you can feel that, I think. You can really feel that watching it. It feels like you're watching Japanese people dressed up as Italian Christians. And that really kind of destroys your sense of disbelief. Your suspension of disbelief, anyway. In fact, there are many times in the show where the characters are just doing specifically non-Christian things. Which, I mean, you know, we're all sinners, of course, but I mean, we're supposed to be depicting a saint and pastors, like Christian leaders, and they just have no intentions of doing anything Christian ever and are just totally fine with doing non-Christian things. It just, what's the point? Why are they even, why did we choose to make them a pastor and a saint if that's not going to mean anything, if that doesn't matter? There's a reoccurring character in the show who's a fortune teller, and plenty of times in the show, the Christians, the pastors and saints, go to the fortune teller to like get their fortunes told and stuff. And it's like, that's just an explicitly anti-Christian. If you ask any like Orthodox Christian, your average church-going Christian, they'll obviously tell you, yeah, you should not go to fortune tellers or people who dabble in the occult and that sort of thing. So why do these Christian leaders in this show just have no issue with that? Why did we even include that? It makes it feel like the people who made this show don't know anything about Christianity, and I'm sure they don't, because a lot of Japanese people don't, and that's not necessarily their fault. But if you're going to make a show about that sort of thing, you have the internet. You can do some research. You can find out if your average Christian thinks it's okay to go to a fortune teller, and I would think most would say it's not. Of course, there are other issues too that we'll get into, but it just feels really disappointing to me that obviously I had a feeling that this wasn't going to be a Christian anime, but I didn't think it was going to fail that hard at even depicting Christianity at all, and it seems completely uninterested in depicting Christianity, as it feels like it just wants to use it as a costume. It doesn't really care that much about it, and that does a real disservice, I think. Japanese people are going to watch this show, and they might end up thinking this is what Christianity looks like, because how would they know any different? Water break. And so it ends up feeling kind of irreverent when we have these Christian leaders who many Christians, millions around the world, would have a lot of respect for, and just kind of puts them in positions they shouldn't be in, and it feels kind of disrespectful. These characters, the timeline is a little confusing, which I'll get into in a second, but people like priests and nuns are people who, like in the Catholic Church and in some other denominations, are people who don't get married. They're people who specifically decide to stay single. And when Saint Cecelia was alive, many, many years ago, that was more of the kind of idea. That was more what she was. And in fact, if you look up who Saint Cecelia was in real life, she was somebody who got martyred because her Christian faith made it so that she didn't want to marry this pagan that was trying to marry her, and the overall pagan society did not like that. So that's why it feels kind of irreverent to me, because they're taking a historical figure who is famous for dying because she wanted to be single and putting her into a rom-com. Just a very odd choice, especially when the fact that she is a Christian saint seems to be not very important to the plot anyway. Why would we choose these characters? Why would we go out of our way to disrespect Christian characters when there's not even a point to it? And this is what I mean about the timeline being kind of confusing, and I wish they were more clear about it. Saint Cecelia lived around 200 years after Jesus died. that's a long time ago. That's almost 2,000 years ago. The world was very different. Christianity was still an oppressed minority religion at the time, in a very pagan society where tons of Christians were being martyred every day. This is just obviously not the world we see depicted in the anime. In the anime, they're in Italy, and seems like most people are Christians and going to church, and the pastor says he's been to seminary, which was definitely not a thing 200 years after Christ died. So we're taking these characters who lived 2,000 years ago and setting them and having them take part in a story that seems to me to be set in like the 1900s. At one point they have cameras in the show and they're taking photos. It's clearly not set in the modern day, but it's definitely not set in any time these characters actually lived. And as far as Pastor Lawrence, I don't think he's based on a historical figure. I did do a little research and find that there was a Saint Lawrence who actually did live around the time of Saint Cecelia. So maybe there's some inspiration there. But even still, setting these characters in a totally wrong generation seems like an odd choice to me. And so maybe I thought, maybe this isn't supposed to be the historical Saint Cecelia. It's just someone born in the 1800s who was just named after Saint Cecelia and just happens to also be a saint named Cecelia. And that seems like that maybe is what they're going for. Again, I wish they were more clear about that if that is true. But I can only suspend my disbelief so far. You can only go so far with the idea that it's just a fictional story with, fictional stuff going on. Don't take it too seriously. Because at the end of the day, we don't live in a fictional world. The author of this story chose to name these characters after the real life Saint Cecelia and other famous characters. He didn't have to do that. And things like pastor, like saint, church, prayer, these things mean something to a lot of people in the world. So just taking those words and just doing your own creative thing with them, I think you can only do that to a limit. You can only go so far with that before it's just doesn't make sense anymore. If he's just completely coming up with his new definitions for saints and pastors and church and Christianity, then why even bother calling it any of those things anyway? Just make up a whole new religion, fake one, to have for your fake story. Why do we have to depict a real one incorrectly? There were just so many choices for this story that are such odd choices, since they don't have any real impact, yet they were still chosen. It just doesn't make any sense. The show itself, as generic as it is, isn't really that bad. If you've seen one anime rom-com, you've kind of seen most of them. If you've already seen one and liked it, then you can skip this one, because it's not going to add anything new to what you've already seen. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the will they, won't they that goes on for 200 episodes, but if that's something you're into, I don't think that's necessarily wrong. That's just kind of what this anime seems to be, and it's not really my thing, especially when they've let me down in the Christian department so badly. In fact, I was about halfway through this 12-episode season, and I was about ready to check out, like have it playing in the background while I'm playing a game on my phone or something, because I just was not catching me. I was not interested. But about halfway through the show, we get introduced to Frederica. This is a character who was a lady saint, which I haven't specifically described yet. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you already know it. You've already seen the show, but basically a lady saint. It's not like in real life. It's unique for the show. The idea is that it's a woman who has special abilities, seemingly gifted to her by God, basically superpowers that she can use to protect people and have like visions of the future, that sort of stuff. But literally just, a human with superpowers at the end of the day. And so Frederica was one of these lady saints. And as a young lady with superpowers, the town that she lived in started to worship her and really put her up on this pedestal. And they saw her so great and powerful and awesome that when she got sick with a totally preventable and curable sickness, they never treated her or gave her any medicine or helped her at all, because they just thought she could handle it. And of course, then she died of the sickness, because at the end of the day, like everybody, she's a human. Regardless of her great powers that were given to her by God, she is still a human. And the story was kind of gripping for me. It was probably the most interesting part of the whole series. And I wish that was more the focus of the whole show, to be honest, than whatever rom-com stuff it was fooling around with most of the time. It was gripping to me because this random set of flashbacks of this character who died in the past was, to me, the only time in the whole series, or the season I should say, that even touched on anything remotely Christian. And I found it interesting. We saw with this character a tragic story about how, because the people worshipped her, because the people saw her as some great and powerful person, she suffered because she wasn't. She had superpowers, but her very being was still just a normal human. And that's very clear in the series. It specifically says that the Lady Saints are still humans. And I think that's really important. We live in a society, at least I do anyway, in America, where we have quite the celebrity culture, where it's very common for people to be put on pedestals and worshipped. And I know that can be a strong word, but it's real. Look around and see how people act around some celebrities. It's definitely worship, as weird as that might sound. And they won't call it that, they won't see it as that, but that is just what it is. There are so many people in our culture who are elevated to a status that they shouldn't be in, because no human can bear the weight of being worshipped by other people, because we are just humans, and we don't even have superpowers. We might have special cool skills like singing really well, or speaking really well, or creating something that people really like, but at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we, when placed up on a pedestal, cannot meet that high bar. And people will always crumple under the weight of another's worship because we can never meet their standard. People want to worship something. I think we're built in that way. That we're built in a way that we want something to give our worship to. And that something is supposed to be God. So when we put something in God's place that isn't God, that thing will just crumble. Because anything that tries to sit in God's throne is going to crumple under the weight of the power of that throne. It's like filling the biggest shoes in all of creation. It's just not possible for anybody. And the anxiety that tears away at people is evident. And when you look at the celebrities in our culture, it's very clear what happens to them. So many of them just go crazy and start doing weird things. A lot of them, unfortunately, end up doing lots of drugs or having serious mental illnesses because they can't handle that weight. And it's a surprisingly deep message that maybe the show doesn't even know it's relaying to people, that we should not worship humans, that humans are humans. In fact, I'm sure the reason Frederica got sick in the first place was from all the pressure of having to be this worshipped and high and powerful individual in the town that she lived. Humans are humans, not gods, and they shouldn't be worshipped like them. And it's really difficult to get out of situations where this thing tends to happen, both for the person being worshipped and the people worshiping that person. The person who's being worshipped can try to use humility as a solution to the issue. Try to make it clear to everybody that they are just like them, a human, not a god, and has flaws just like everybody else and should not be worshipped. But people are crazy and will worship the darndest things, and it's tough to get away from that sometimes for some celebrities, right? I mean, regardless of what some celebrities say or do, they have to deal with that. So part of it is on the person worshiping other people to realize that their worship isn't wrong, it's just wrongly placed. That there is something that they should be worshiping, but it's not another person. Our worship is due to God and to God alone. And when our worship is placed in Him, it doesn't crumble under the weight of it. because he is truly worthy of that worship, unlike any human ever could be. Worshiping God then fulfills us. When you worship a person and that person fails or dies, something terrible happens in some way to destroy that faith that you have in them and that worship, that can seriously negatively affect you. But when you worship God, the rightful place for your worship, God will never fail you. And you become very fulfilled in that. That's one of the ways that worshiping God can fulfill you, is knowing that he's not going to let you down like a human would. So then, if a celebrity or someone finds themselves being worshipped, best thing that they can do is try to redirect that worship to God. And if you are somebody who is worshiping another human being, you need to redirect that worship to God, where it is rightfully due. I've heard it said, one easy way to tell if you worship something is if God asked you to give it up, would you be able to give it up? Or another way of putting it is, would you be able to live without that thing for the rest of your life if you needed to? Obviously, I'm not talking about like drinking water or eating food necessarily, but like if for whatever reason you were never able to listen to songs by this artist or watch shows from this production company or play this game or whatever, or live without a specific celebrity influencing you in any way, would you be able to do that? And I think it's at least something worth thinking about. Because the fact is, at some point you will have to live or exist without that thing. Other people may die. You may die and not be able to have that TV show or game anymore. At some point, everything turns to dust. But with God, you never have to be without him. In fact, it's quite difficult to be without him because he's always with you. So, in conclusion, I won't go on for too much longer. Just to say, the show, St. Cecelia and Pastor Lawrence, had a lot of misses, but did hit at least once. And overall, it wasn't the worst show I've ever seen by far, so I'm not going to hate on it too much. It's just, unfortunately, my search for a Christian anime continues, and I still have yet to find it. And Saint Cecelia and Pastor Lawrence is not it. If you have anything that you would like me to watch or talk about, then there's a lot I want to talk about. But if you have any suggestions or any other thoughts, disagreements, whatever, let me know. Until then, I will see you next time.